Welcome to the Tabletop Gaming Magazine podcast. I'm Chris Eggett, the editor of the magazine. Today we're joined by Alex, a reviewer of the magazine, to talk about big, messy games. These games with too many components, too many rules, and we're going to talk about why we love them. We get Alex's top 5 messy games, talk about Kickstarter culture, as well as a little bit about co-op, a little bit about solo play. On we go. So would you like to introduce yourself to those listeners who don't know exactly who you are already?
Hi. My name is Alex, as has been mentioned. You may have read some of the words of the board game material that I have written in Tabletop Gaming Magazine. I have a lot of opinions. They usually come in the ways of reviews, where I try to be nice and objective and all those things that good reviews should be. And I've also, you may have seen a couple of features by me. I think most recent one was Dwelling in the World of a Role Player series, and just seeing how that world started from one game and kind of developed through by accident and through the need into the whole series of games, and I found it really fascinating. So anyway, check out that feature just because I really like that series of games and I think it's an interesting story.
Yeah, no, it was very good, and also, as you say, it felt accidental how they got to all these
Yeah.
to all these other games, and Stanislav Korinsky, who did the Lockup, is it
Yes.
Role Player Lockup? He's done a game called Rurik. I don't know if you
Oh
played
yeah.
that.
I have not played that, but I have heard of that.
It's fabulous, and I'm currently writing about it for the next issue. And it's it's just it's one of the smartest games I've played. Anyway, but it's just nice to see a bit of connective tissue there. But today we're not talking about sort of sprawling. Well, we are talking about sprawling worlds, actually, aren't we?
Yes, yes, we kind of are. Yes.
Yeah. So we want to talk about huge, messy games with too many pieces.
Oh boy. Yeah, those guys.
Yeah. So how are we going to define this genre of big messy games?
See, I think the tricky part of it that there's almost I think two sides from which we can come at it, but I think the main side is your first introduction to the game because I think that's almost kind of the trickiest part whenever you open the box and you meet it. And I think there's two different sides of you can see all this components and pieces to pop up and things to assemble to get really excited because you're gonna get a lot for your worth and you're gonna spend a lot of time assembling the game. But sometimes it can be a little bit daunting because you just want to get into there, you just want to start playing, and you see you're like, oh god, all this cardboard that I need to pop up and then read the rules.
That is exactly where I went as well. When you have a very weary sigh because you've realised that the wodge of cardboard you got out is all things you're going to have to poke out.
Hmm.
And that weary sigh means that yes, you're in the world of big messy games with lots of tokens and things like that.
Yeah, it's probably important to put a little bit of a caveat that both you and me, we do a fair bit of reviews, so I think we are more fatigued than most from kind of opening the board games because someone else has been waiting for a game for a very long time and it finally arrives and they get to open this box. There's this hoo-ha moment where we could be jaded, so this could be kind of coloring our perspective of it as well because we're like, oh, that's another game that we need to play. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't that excitement and you're also not looking forward to it, but I think there could be that element as well.
I mean that's definitely true, and I mean we're not just jaded though. We've got bruised fingers
Oh yeah.
from popping out too many tokens.
Yeah,
I think
I remember your email to me apologizing for giving me a game with like hundreds of dice, and I replied, no, the other game with 3,000 pieces was more.
that was it. So that
Yeah.
from memory, that's post-human, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
that was post-human.
that's yeah, a million tokens and all that sort of thing. And what was the other one? Waterdeep, was it? Was it a
Yeah, It was Dice Masters Waterdeep, their newest edition, and obviously Dice Masters. Well, this was a core set, so it came with a lot of different characters. And if you've ever played Dice Masters, you know that every character comes with their own set of beautiful dice. So with the core set, there were quite a few characters, and therefore there were quite a few dice.
I think I'm still excited by dice, so that would have got me. But
Oh yeah.
I'm sure one day there will come a point where I see a big bowl of dice, and I'm like, I'm over it, but maybe not.
No.
No?
I think no, that's never gonna happen. No.
Yes, and so we're defining it by having loads of stuff in it, having also probably a long setup time.
Yes.
You're going to have to make several piles, a lot of table space. Yes, it's a dining room table, definitely. And I guess a lot of the time they are games that are going to stay there for a while.
Yeah. Some of them. I'm sure we will talk about some of the games on the list that would definitely benefit from them. That's why in a lot of cases, these games that I think stay on the table, they come in the kind of RPG in the box variety with campaigns, because these are the ones that you almost feel like you've taken the time to set it up and you laid it out on the table and it looks beautiful, and you've done one campaign and it almost feels like a shame to put it away, knowing how long it will take you to bring it back and knowing that you kind of want to pick up right off where you stopped.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean that's how I play it. I mean that's how I end up playing a lot of these games, and especially if these games have a solo mode and I'm able to do a campaign mode very slowly, and sort of coming back to it like, I don't know, a snack that I've left on the side, or something like that, where I'm just playing a few turns of it and then going away and doing something important and then coming back to re-engage with it. Often that's when I leave these games out. I mean, there is a few games that have sort of options to save and stuff like that, but really they're never satisfactory, are they? Completely.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a couple of games, I'm trying to rack my brain, where you literally could sort of put in a save state and pack it in a box in a way that it remembers sort of your last turn or where you were at last.
So the ones I can think of are, I mean, Time Stories does that, and
Yes.
also Seventh Continent does that.
But
they're not as messy.
Yes, that's another thing.
Yes, and so yes, you can have lots of piles of cards all over the place, and maybe the board itself is going to be very big. And yeah, I think that's it. And they were probably on Kickstarter, these games, a lot of them.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's
especially lately. Yeah.
I think that's probably a good definition, unless you can think of anything else that we should add in there.
I also think there is with these games, they don't only come with a lot of components, but because they sort of the reason why they do this, they're trying to sort of be this sprawling epic things that allow the players to do a lot of things at the same time and give them this freedom almost.
Yeah.
And because of that, almost kind of ironically, they come with quite a bit of rules. And I think sometimes it could be even messy, not learning them so much, but like jumping back into them and trying to remember what all the little definitions and things happened and going through the rule books and kind of trying to grasp what is going on. Because, some of the games, like, let me think of an example, Carcassonne. I'm pretty sure you'll never forget how to play Carcassonne once you learn it the first time.
Yes, that's quite right.
Yeah, but think of a much bigger, heavier game with the stories and campaigns and the combat rules and all that kind of stuff, and suddenly you may have played it 2 days ago, but now you're dipping back into the rule book to check that one detail to make sure you're playing it right.
I mean, I'll say an example of that. One of my favourites is a game we featured quite recently called Degenerates, which I've just opened the box here before the call, so I could just sort of, in case I needed a prop or anything. And it's all beautiful, obviously. But I've opened it and I found that the rulebook is on a certain section where I was clearly working out some of the overland travel rules before I last packed it away.
Do you know what? Downton Degenerates is almost one of those games. If I didn't have to review it, I'm not sure I would have gotten through the rulebook. I found it intensely frustrating.
It is in parts like, yes, but then I think that's the heart of it, of what we're hopefully coming to here, which is once you're in though,
Yeah,
it's the value of it, or the what it gives you back, is
yeah,
really satisfying.
exactly.
And yeah, so I guess we're talking about like hard to learn games as well. That's a big part of it, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. So shall we move on to the and talk about where they come from?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think a lot of them come from Kickstarter. Um, and again, I think you can look for it for two sides, and there's definitely two sides to argue. One is, I think, big flashy games with lots of components and miniatures, they do well on Kickstarter. But at the same time, the game of that complexity also get to shine on Kickstarter and find their audience. So there's a balance between here's this really heavy, big component heavy game that's really trying to do something fun and interesting and um, it found its audience who are looking for exactly that kind of thing. And here's this game who's got all these fancy components and miniatures just because it knows that's what's attractive on your screen while you're scrolling, it catches your attention.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a couple of sides to the whole Kickstarter thing there, and yeah, as you say, it's very attractive to people. And also, I think Kickstarter is kind of a because you're not getting the game for a long time often.
Yeah.
It's a like an aspirational platform. So
Mm.
it's like I would really like to play a huge adventure. I'd like to be the kind of person who can play, who can set aside 8 hours to play a huge campaign or to a huge war game with eight of my friends and be this a game for only eight people, for example, or it's got 400 miniatures or something like that. I think there's an element of that where people sort of engage with that part of their brain,
Mm.
and they want the thing that speaks to like this gaming experience, which is actually like quite hard to arrange often, and so I think that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is, yeah, as you say, the stuff. You know, people want stuff for their money, fairly, and the games that seem to offer the most, obviously, are kind of the best value in lots of ways.
Yeah.
And I think maybe intrinsically, stretch goals are a thing that lead to games. They lead to games that have this kind of bloat occasionally, and occasionally, they're just these wonderful messes that we love. Do you think that's right, or do you think there's other causes from Kickstarter?
No, I think that's pretty correct. And one thing that I would add, there is a tendency to kind of this almost kind of excitement that people are interested in, people are backing that gets put into stretch goals, which are additions upon additions. And sometimes you see a game and you clearly see, you can spot it in the design where the stretch goal meets the game because it's a cool idea, but it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, that's it.
So you can spot it right there. But sometimes, actually, very interestingly, and not a few Kickstarters done it, and I think it's kind of brave, but I've seen a couple that went, our stretch goal is improving on the component quality of this. We're just gonna do better cards, better sleeve. This beautiful book is now even more beautiful, and that's all there is. And that is also quite interesting because at the end of the day, you are getting. I don't want to say luxury because that's just kind of sounds weird, but it feels more Kickstarter and it feels more made kind of for you because you've unlocked these things and they've created a board game that is even more beautiful than originally you saw this beautiful thing on the screen, if that makes any sense.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes, this sort of variability is, I think, one of the reasons Kickstarter does sometimes have like a bit of a negative, and maybe I'm immediately being negative as well because I do actually think the stuff that comes out of Kickstarter is really clever. Often,
Mm,
and often it's a great place for, as you say, creators to find an audience that they weren't really sure existed. I think that's kind of wonderful. haven't seen that variability between the ones where it's adding mechanics versus adding kind of quality. Both are dangerous, actually, in terms of making a
Could be.
game. um, you could be in a position where people accept a quality that you as a designer might not accept because they're just like, yeah, that's cool, that's fine, and people might not necessarily know the difference between the product quality that they're getting, and that will affect their sort of enjoyment of the thing. Because obviously, it's very difficult. I think we borrow our review language often from like maybe new games journalism, possibly, as sort of like a baseline. So we borrow that a lot, but we're also like reviewing physical products often, and that analog aspect of how does it feel and how all that sort of stuff is actually part of the experience, even if it's not something we focus on particularly. And so there does seem to be a slight danger there in that, but still aspirational, and we do get these weird games out of it, which we like. So we've got that, and then the other aspect that might lead us to these games existing is partly because of Kickstarter, but the RPG in a box. Is it all Gloomhaven's fault?
Oh, I think there were the big games before Gloomhaven, honestly, but I don't know. Don't you think, as much as we love Gloomhaven, and I'm sure we will talk about it a bit later, wink wink, but I think it almost kind of turned maybe many people away just because of the amount of stuff, and people started thinking of the more compact way to do this. And I feel like almost all these narrative apps that Lord of the Rings, the Middle Earth is using, and Oathsworn is going to use, that they kind of were introduced to mitigate what Gloomhaven had to face in the first instance, that it packed so much, that it was so heavy, that other designers stopped and wait. Well, we want to have the same depth. We want to have the same amount of lore and storytelling, if not more. But what do we do to condense the stuff?
Yeah. I did actually in the wild see someone on my own Twitter account, not the Tabletop Gaming one. I saw a very normal person who I didn't know played board games at all or anything like that. Suddenly post a screenshot of the Gloomhaven board where I think they were. I think there was something like there's a bunch of skeletons and some NPCs and their player characters and stuff like that, and they said they were just exhausted having to move around everyone. And it's like, there's a genuine fatigue in sort of managing this stuff, and that's why that compression that you talk about has to come in somewhere. But then that's kind of the simulationist end of things that we quite like, actually. And that comes to this point that I wanted to make up, we talked about earlier before the call, of something that I learned from Sean Ortberg, who's the creator of Dungeon Degenerates. Now, he said he felt like this game was kind of a version of a role-playing video game to him. And he wanted to give people the options to do all these weird things in kind of as much fidelity as possible. And so I think a lot of these games are trying, in some ways, to sort of recreate a video game feeling in an analog medium. And I wonder what you thought about that, whether that's something you feel people are trying to emulate.
Well, there's definitely a connection, and a connection that I think has been, it's been there for a very long time, and it's kind of growing stronger with thinking of all the video game franchises coming to board games, and board games being developed into video games. There's always been an exchange here and there, and I think in a lot of ways, if you think these are the industry that are so closely connected that people get instantly inspired of each other. I mean, for instance, and kind of jumping back for a second to what we started with, which was my feature on the role player, Keith. Who was the creator of Role Player. He worked in the video game industry before, and he worked on video games that were involved with character creation. And what Role Player essentially became is a character creation in a board game form, which had inspirations from his video game days, and obviously had the links to D&D. So I think it is all interconnected, and I think it's actually quite ambitious trying to translate a video game RPG into board game form, and there's a lot of interesting ways to do that as well.
Yeah, I think. I mean, obviously, some are more successful than others.
Obviously, yes.
There is something really admirable about someone trying to create a like maybe like an experience system or something like that that mirrors in some way the experience systems you have in video games, or like item management and stuff like that. There's sometimes there are ways that you expect analog games to handle those things. You don't have an inventory, you have a hand of cards, for example.
Yeah.
But some games ignore that and try and emulate the video game version of it, and it comes out kind of funny and interesting. And I think that's what these games are all about, is that funny and interesting aspect. Yeah. So shall we do your top five?
Oh, let's do that.
Yeah.
Of messy, messy games.
Great.
The Tabletop Gaming Game Store is open and dispatching orders worldwide. Visit www.tabletopgaming.co.uk to read the reviews and buy the games directly from us.
We should start from number 5 and go up. One thing before number 5 that I would like to say, because the game that you've been mentioning has actually made it on the list, but I actually didn't think it was that messy, which is Dungeon Degenerates. But it's definitely one of my the games that I really, really like. And I've enjoyed playing it loads. And it is quite big. And as we talked about, it's trying to emulate that video game RPG feeling. But I don't know, to me it didn't sound too messy. Like, did you feel like it was messy, even with the rules and with the setup?
Oh, it was really the rules, and then also the way Dungeon Degenerates work for people at home is that there's a sort of I forgot the term for it. I have to look at the rule book. There's a thing kind of like a threat level or a doom level in every area of the game.
Yeah.
And so after each action, or the beginning of each of your turns or rounds, you draw a card, and that gives you an indication of where the threat level is going up or down, and what happens nearby you as well. So every time you take a turn, something in the world changes, and you have to swap a token somewhere. Maybe you have to change the state of something around you, and that might encourage an encounter, which encourages another thing to happen. And then you check that. I think you have to do a check of that level and see if anywhere's hit a certain threshold, because that will mean something else happens involving. There's like the police as well. That's a different threat level that goes up and down. So there's things like that. That kind of like, you draw one card and have to do 7 things to the world state. So that's that kind of messiness.
It is a very evolving board. You set it up one way, and by the time you're done with it, it's changed.
Yeah, I really like that. I love it. But that's why I felt it was like kind of messy. And I think again, it's probably a lot of it's to do with the rules and things like using voids, and because you can go into the void and appear somewhere else if you've opened 2, I think. But that's just one of the ways you can travel in. But you might lose sanity doing that. All the items you get.
If the name of the game doesn't give it away, it's that game is neon cuckoo craziness, but in amazing ways. But yes.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and as I say, the overland travel as well. You can move one way down the river. You can only go downstream, right? And just things like that, where you do just have to go back to the rules and go, okay, where am I? What am I doing now? And the difference between doing normal foot travel and a forced march. The 2 statuses you can have, you can be in it's like an aggressive state, and then like a defensive or a sneaky state.
Yeah, because that determines your kind of combat, whether you are more defensive or attacking if you meet someone else.
Exactly, that's it. Yeah. And so you have all these interesting little strategic decisions that are like flicking, like, it's like having a keyboard with 2,000 buttons on them. None of them are labelled particularly. But you learn that you have to press all these each turn.
Yeah.
And it does do something quite pleasing in your brain, at least. So that's why I think it's a little bit messy. Yeah, so I may have run into your number 5 there.
That's okay. So my number 5 is Gloom of Kill IV.
Oh yes.
And yes, and I really love that game. The story building in there is fantastic. But the reason why I think is messy is, well, if you've never played Gloom of Kill IV, it's basically RPG in card formats. Almost everything in this RPG is on the cards. Your characters, your objectives, your weapons, your spells, even the map of the world is on the cards. And it can be a little bit messy to set up because obviously you have to sort out for the decks. A little bit of understanding of how the game works can help you setting up more quickly. This is one of those where I think you go away from it for a period of time and you come back and you kind of have to have a refresher. You're like, what does that do? What does that mean? How does that go together? And that fits back into your setup and sorting of a deck and arranging all of that and picking your character race and character class and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's also a little bit messy on the rule front, because as an RPG that's trying to do a lot and it's got this interesting card setup, it has all these tiny terms that they're not the terms you're not familiar with. You would know them, but they rename them in their own certain way. And so every time you have to kind of refer back to like, what does that mean? Okay, that means like that's a free action. Oh, that means I have to like have this card in my hand. Oh, this means that card has been played. Like they are written in a game zone language that once you get into it, you're there. But there is a stage before you get into it.
Yeah. It's and I think these games where you said the card based games where you're because as you travel in Gloom,
Yes.
you flip a card and then you move to that location, don't you?
Yeah.
Unless there's I think you might have events that you have to do before you can do that and stuff like that. But
So you've got your tableau of cards that are laid out, which are these locations around the Kill IV. And you travel through location to location, your normal orthogonal movement. And as you go there, as you travel to a new place, that's when the event happens, which is a combat encounter, an event, a stranger, all those kinds of things that you will end up having to resolve. But the trick about them that they're actually Gloom is taking over this mystical dark force, and it actually turns over and flips over those location cards and makes them more dangerous and more unfriendly for you to be in. Almost, imagine Forbidden Island, how you've turned over the sunken tiles and they become sunken and accessible. Well, here in Gloom, they are accessible, but they're much more dangerous, and you kind of would want to be stuck on them. And as you build this tableau up, you do end up having, some of the monsters you want immediately defeat, so they stay on the cards, and then you'll add more events, and it kind of sort of becomes building. And there's kind of a danger that, one accidental swoosh of a hand just sends the whole board in disarray and all the cards get messed up.
I mean, that is the primary fear of card-based worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad enough in time stories, nudging your tableau or whatever there. But but this is a whole world.
Yeah, it's like, careful. I mean, don't breathe is a bit of exaggeration, but try not to mess up the card layout a bit too much.
It's important to say that we like this game.
We do. I really like it. And here's the thing, it's a really testament to the game that as much as I can nitpick, its terminology and the amount of decks and cards to sort through, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I'm right there. You come to me, it's like, you want to play Gloom of Kill IV? I'm like, hang on, I'm laying down the table. I'm setting this whole thing up. I'm still doing it. Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that with each of them. We'll come to the point at the end after explaining why it's such a mess, to explain why it's a hot mess. Should we do number 4?
Yes. Number 4 is a controversial one because I think you really didn't like it. And I quite like it, but it's like a guilty pleasure like it. So it's called Fujikoro.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
So I bounced really hard off this. Would you like to explain what it is first?
So,
If we can.
Fujikoro. How would you explain Fujikoro? So, your Shogun heroes stuck in an imminently erupting volcano. You're traveling through this volcano, mining for resources, making your sandals and helmets and armor, finding monks that are also randomly wandering through the crater of the volcano, and dragons, because of course there are dragons, because you want to fight those dragons to make your sandals shinier sandals. And at some point throughout the game, the volcano will finally decide, well, it's time to erupt now, enough of the monks and the dragons, and then you have to escape it. And that's Fujikoro.
And when you say that, that sounds like one of the best games. That sounds fabulous, and I wish that's what the game was. Good. Tell us why it's a mess for you, and then I'll do a small reprieve on my concerns.
Oh gosh, it's. I think this is the case of one of those games that look beautiful on your Kickstarter screen, and once you get them and you open the box, you initially excited, and then you think, why? Because there's a lot of things in here where you think, oh, why? Um, so your volcano is built out of these beautiful ornate tiles that supposed to clip into each other. And the way you started by building a border, and your border is essentially your scoring track. And then you start with the center, which you kind of position. You're like, okay, that kind of feels right. And then you build the free circles of the tiles. Except what you kind of end up wandering usually in one way, and you build it and you fix it to the border, and you're like, yes, all good, and it looks beautiful. And just let me reiterate this: the tiles, they look beautiful.
It does look great.
Yes. And then you wander to the other side because you're still trying to explore this volcano. That maybe there is like a really scary dragon on that side, and you're like, nah, I'm backing away. Or you still haven't found the rope that gets you out of the volcano because ropes at volcano that's getting hot and on fire. Yes,
I think it's just a really good rope.
Yeah, it's a magical rope. Anyway, so you're wandering to the other side of this volcano, and you're trying to fit the tiles in, and it's becoming kind of tight, and it's kind of fitting, but it's not. And then you kind of get to the other side of this board, and things stop fitting. And then it becomes a little bit rage-inducing because it looks so beautiful, and it's designed to fit so perfectly, and it just doesn't.
I guess that's probably exactly my problems with it, in terms of not just that last sentence of it's been designed to fit perfectly and it doesn't. Just like there's so much design in it, there's so many ideas in it, and if they'd picked maybe half of them, we would have had like a really good game. I think in your review you highlighted one of my major design or product design frustrations of it, which is the lovely pagoda temple things.
Oh, yes.
Which we set them up and we were like, yeah, these are really important. Yeah, so, because you're doing the sort of poking things out thing. And then you set them up and then you realise what they are for, as you said in your review, is to hold the sum total of 2 cards.
Yep. Yeah, and look, and again, it's beautiful because it's added this 3D element to the board, and they're on all the sides, and it's kind of like all this atmospheric thing. But then, you have to pop them out of the cardboard. You have to assemble them. They assemble okay, but the pieces kind of slide sometimes a little bit and you kind of like trying to put it very gently back into the box so, it doesn't fall apart. And then, and then you think, oh, what was that for? Okay, well, 2 cards. Great.
It was complete madness. That's how I would describe it. Aspect of it. For me, the whole thing was a mess in a not so good way as well because of the crafting element. which is suddenly we're playing Minecraft,
Yeah.
which is, I guess, fine. I guess it's a kind of universal language for crafting now. I think it was actually pretty straightforward, but I don't know why that was needed at all. I don't know why I needed to place the blocks in a certain shape.
Yes. Well, I think if I'm trying to find the reasons that make sense to me why this is needed, is because I think the combat in this game in Fujikoro is pretty simple. You roll a bunch of dice, you get a hit, and stuff like that. So they needed to make the system of the combat slightly more interesting, and also actually give you insight to go fight those dragons and kill those things. And for that, you have to make your weapons with shiny dragon teeth that make you stronger and give you more defensible abilities. And I guess the easiest way to do that was to imagine them as cubes that you could arrange in certain ways to make that sword. And if the sword breaks, and think of those arrangements in case the sword breaks. Like if I go into the fight and I dealt a certain amount of damage and I have to get rid of the cube there, does that break my sword? Is it still a viable weapon after all? So that's kind of like the tricky situation of thinking, do I have right now, is not only my equipment good enough for the fight, but also have I made this weapon so that I can continue the fight if I get unlucky in this dice roll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good defense of it. But still, I bounced pretty hard. Yeah. But you love it, and why do you?
Because of the thing that I think we said at the beginning, it's just really silly and really fun. There's a mechanic where you can distract a dragon by throwing a monk at them. So you find in this poor monk, so they're doing something in the middle of the crater of Volcano, and then once you find them, you see the dragon, you're like, right, fella, you run there, please, and shout very loudly. So he turns around that way, and while you're running there and shouting, I'm going to try to stab him with a sword at the back. I don't know. Just to me, there's just something kind of hilarious about this whole thing, and, the game completely taking itself not seriously, and you think it's complicated, but it's actually really, really, really not. We've been talking about crafting these weapons. Sounds complicated, but it's not. Combat is just rolling the dice. You go around, you explore, you build this map. The monks. It kind of gets you into this whole spirit of this whole silliness. So you just keep imagining this crazy scenarios, and I don't know. I'm with it. I'm with this.
I mean,
monks and dragons.
Yeah, that story has kind of convinced me it can't be too bad, can
it? I'm glad. A case for Fujikoro.
Yeah, a case for, absolutely, yes. That's the title of the episode, yeah. Cool. Shall we move on to number 3?
Okay, so number 3 will be Eldritch Horror. And I think the reason for that, in many senses, I think is the same as Gloom of Kill IV. Just a lot of cards, a lot of decks to sort through. As many times as I've played this game, every single time, the daunting task of sorting all the cards was designated to the player who played it the most, because they immediately knew this goes into that stack. This ancient needs these cards and these things, and we need to these are the proportions of the bad event things that need to go in there. And it takes up a lot of space. That's one of the games that you think, oh, it's just cards. It's just a board and cards. Well.
Why is it good?
Gosh, it's a really tough cooperative game. Let's start with that. It's got this whole Cthulhu Detective aspect. So for anyone who's not played, the monsters, there's this mysterious gates that are popping up everywhere in the world, and they're spewing monsters. And you're investigating the series of events, bad events happening, and they trigger certain things, and some specific things that will depend on the type of game you play or the type of ancient you choose. The ancient will spawn, and this is a big monster that are hard to kill, and the investigators go around different places around the globe. You have this big world map, and You do the checks depending on your stats. So some might be good at at your combat, at your investigation, wits, whatever, and there were roll checks based on that, and that will make decisions and progression for the story and give them either abilities or disadvantages or injuries and all that kind of stuff. And the world is just fascinating in many ways and really addictive, and you get really atmospheric straight away. And all the events might be very kind of condensed, separate stories, or rather not even stories, just scenarios, but it gives you a really good feel of you being in that world, and all these creepy things are happening, and the ticking clock of the time running out, and you're like, you need to get this done or bad things will happen, that kind of thing.
I think there's a really important point you make there, you made at the start there, particularly of a hard co-op game.
Yes.
I think you've written about this before, I know, but the idea that co-op games should be as brutal as possible, basically.
I definitely think the hardness of cooperative games, I think, is what unites us. It shouldn't be impossible, but it definitely should be hard. They should push you to work together, to think together. It's not just about players not playing against each other. It's about players truly cooperating and kind of, thinking, okay, well, I'm good at this. Not just even as a player, but as a person. And I'm good at this. How do we merge both the things we are good together and show this game what we can do, basically? And Eldritch Horror is for sure, I think, anyone's, unless you're a genius, and then, I'm hands down to you, that you're going to play many, 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 many games before you secure your first win.
That's ideal. I mean, is that true of all these games, actually? That they're games that are going to kill you halfway through at some point?
Well, all of these on the list.
Yeah. And maybe not, actually. Maybe not. Fujikoro probably didn't kill you the first time.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't start killing you until the latter part of the game. So Fujikoro is divided in two parts. The first one is your exploration, throw the monks, fight the dragons part. And when players reach a certain amount of victory points, which I believe is 30, that's when the volcano erupts, and that's when you can die if you sort of get stuck there for in the crater for a very long time. But yes, all the other ones, I think, on the list can and will kill you.
That's great. That's what we come to these games for. So, in part,
exactly.
We come for the hot mess, and we come for violent death. And,
yeah.
So number two.
Number two is Robinson Crusoe. And again, I love that game. I think it's one of the best games that takes a theme and puts it to mechanics and creates a board game. I think that's absolutely fantastic. I don't think I've played many other games that where theme worked so well as in Robinson Crusoe. But it's got quite a bit of setup. It comes with all the different components. In this case, you've got cards and board and dice and characters and little tokens, your bananas and your bread and your furs go there and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, you've got, different campaigns that you have to set up for. And Robinson Crusoe, speaking of a cooperative game that is hard, it is also really hard. I've had situations where we spent half an hour setting it up and then we died within 3 turns, and we went like, well, now what? And that's an actual thing that happened. But it's one of those I feel like this is the one to leave on the table and have a couple of goes. Taking the literal story of Robinson Crusoe and dumping you on the island and be like, well, survive now, and we're gonna throw all these bad stuff at you. You're running out of food, the animals are attacking you, there are locals that are not friendly, and all these weather conditions that are bad. And I've already named so many different elements to the game that components have to account for.
Yes.
And yes, they work fantastically together, but they will take time to set up, and then they will take time a little bit to learn as well. But in this case, from a memory, the rulebook is actually okay.
Yes, well,
But
that's a godsend, isn't it? To
yeah, yeah,
a gentle rule book.
a gentle bookie.
Cool. And shall we do your number one?
Yes.
I don't have a drum roll, but maybe we'll put one in later.
I think number one, I would be surprised if it's not a lot of people's number one, and we've already kind of talked about it, but it's Gloomhaven. Because, gosh, I love that game, but every time I think of setting it up, I get a little bit shaky in the knees. And it's funny because I think in my campaign we've replaced most of the things with the apps, because they're like the number one thing that we replaced with the apps is the enemy combat, because you've got enemy decks and they all deal different kind of damage, and that just stopped the game right straight away, especially for new people. And I remember when the first time I played it, that's I started glazing over a little bit because I got so excited. We chose a character, we went into dungeon, and then we had to fight, and there was all the turning of the cards and distribution of the tokens, and and combat in Gloomhaven is fantastic, the card combat, but the actual enemies can slow it down a bit. And as soon as we replaced it with an app, and took a good chunk of cards and tokens out of the box and put them into storage because we weren't using them because we were using the app, the experience, it was a much better experience.
Yeah, I think that's I remember watching the PAX Unplugged reveal for Frosthaven. I think someone in that, I think that's right, that they asked whether they'd be doing an app as well. And it's one of those things where people were really so invested in this game and now series of games that it almost feels like a weird question. Like, are you going to do the app for it? Will there be removable stickers? These sort of questions, which I think are probably legitimate questions, but they are things that just show how people are like already pre-editing this huge game, this huge experience. They're just in their heads. They're already saying, "I know this is going to be hard. This is something that's going to take over my life." And when I spoke to him about Frosthaven, when I spoke to Isaac about Frosthaven, he said that his hope for the game was that it would be slightly less successful than Gloomhaven, which seems unlikely actually at this point. Looking at the
well, it's definitely the biggest board game Kickstarter, but I think it's also like in the top 5 of the biggest Kickstarters ever, or something like that. Yeah. Like it's become huge. I don't want to mess up my numbers, but it's out there.
It's 12 million plus, isn't it? It's
something
gigantic.
crazy.
Yeah. And we had this conversation right at the end of the interview of where he hoped for the game, and slightly less successful he hoped, and then also that it would do the same thing, which is the complaint compliment he gets the most of, "You've taken over my dining table for months." And it's just, it's so bizarre to have that as like, that would be like an okay outcome for a game. Imagine a game designer, telling you that they just like to take over your table for months on end. It's just absolutely wild. But yes, it does take over people's lives very much, and there is a lot to it.
Yeah. Well, I remember one of the first instances is even before I played it. I saw a group in a board game bar. Group of people were playing Gloomhaven, and they specifically brought just stuff for that campaign. They didn't bother bringing, the whole box. It was too big. There was just too much. So they packed everything they needed for that scenario, brought it there, left it on the table. And to me, I don't know. It's kind of like maybe it's a weird board gaming thing, but I almost get like a little worry taking components out of the box and putting them somewhere else. I'm like, no, what if I lose them? What if that board game is not complete? Like, I can't.
I was getting nervous you telling that story. I mean, even going there to do it, I can't imagine myself doing that for a start. I would just bring the whole box and deal with the back pain in later life. Just the idea of going out publicly to play a game like that and not bringing everything and being sure that I've got everything. It's like, there's no way I'd not forget something. And then yes,
it's pro planning.
I mean, these people are either nutters or are very in control of their great inventory management. That's what it is. But and that's a terrifying idea. of bringing parts of a game only.
Oh,
But yes, it's probably just an insight into maybe why we like these games full of
yeah.
so much stuff, is we want to put it all back in the box in some way.
Yep. And keep it extremely
Yes.
tidy. Never break everything, sleeve everything. Okay, but that might be, my OCD speaking up. I'm gonna.
I'm sadly not someone who uses card sleeves, so I may be a heathen.
Try to with most things, but then you realize, and that's slightly off tangent, but kind of relevant. You realize that a lot of this beautiful games with beautiful box inserts are not actually designed for when their cards
Absolutely
are
not.
sleeved, and then suddenly they don't fit in the inserts, and suddenly you've wanted to make something tidier, but you made more of a mess, and then it's a whole different kind of board gaming problem.
That was my most recent cardboard manifesto was on please make tidy boxes. That was which is yes the smallest hill on which to die, but somehow important to me. That's lovely, great. So messy games, are they good?
I think so. I think if this list is any indication, it's number well. Firstly, they're all great games, even though you might disagree on my number 4, but I may have turned you around. We'll see. But they're all great games, and they're all games that we keep coming back to, and and all of these old titles that everyone's speaking about, and immediately. Actually, if you think about it, I don't think if I give you the title of every single game, the first thing you will say is, "Oh, components." Like, I think with Gloomhaven, the first thing you'll say, either characters or the combat. Robinson Crusoe, you'll say, "Oh my god, like survival on the island, tough board game." Eldritch Horror, also same thing, all the detectives and Cthulhu. Fujikoro, Monks and Dragons. I'm starting this one. And Gloom of Kill IV, you'll be like, this beautiful artwork on these cards, but the components, the messiness of components doesn't come to the forefront. But I do think it's there, and I do think it's important. But the one important thing it is, we'll nitpick it, we'll point it out. It may cause us minor frustrations from time to time, but it doesn't stop loving us. It doesn't stop us loving these games, and it doesn't stop us playing these games.
I think that's the thing to come away with, really. That these are the games we love, maybe because they're a little bit messy as well, as in spite of it. Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Would you like to plug anything?
My plug generally is I would appreciate if you read my stuff in Tabletop Gaming. I love writing it, and I hope people enjoy reading it. And if you'd like to follow my very occasional rare tweets, I'm at DustyTulip _ on Twitter, and that's about it.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Our intro music is Cloud Meetings by Body in the Thames, which you can find at bodyinthethames.bandcamp.com. You can find us on tabletopgaming.co.uk. You can find us on Twitter at tabletopmag, on Facebook as Tabletop Gaming Magazine. You can find us on Instagram at tabletop_gaming_magazine. And we've just launched a Twitch channel, which you can find at twitch.tv/tabletopgamingmag. If you like the show, recommend it to a friend, or subscribe to the magazine, which you can do on our website.